Hi, I'm Tori Hagaman. One of the things that I really love about starting a new big painting is that nothing has gone wrong. I'm so full of hope and optimism that maybe this is going to be the painting that's going to be my very favorite, and my expectations are very high. I've been debating whether or not to do this in acrylic or oil. Because there are going to be so many reflections in the watering can, I've decided to do it in oil, but you could do it in either. I did do the outline in acrylic, and then I'm going to use oil for the rest of the painting. I also debated whether or not to use a projector. I really prefer my paintings when I've drawn the outline by hand because I think it just looks a little looser. I tend to paint a little tighter when I have a tighter drawing. But I wanted to play with the scale of this and the placement of this, and the projector really helped me with that. So to combat that tightness, I'm going to be using big brushes, big strokes, and I'm going to, with all that I am, I'm going to try to keep this painting super loose. I love loose painting. My personal bent tends to be pretty tight, so that's something I have to fight. But there are ways to work against that and intentionally improve that looseness of your painting, and I'm going to be focusing on a number of those methods as I walk through this painting with you. I particularly love doing still lifes because I tend to get bored, I guess, pretty easily, and I love the variety of objects that are in the still life. I love the challenge of, can I get that watering can to look like metal, to look reflective? Can I get that pot to look like it's really terracotta? And of course, I love anything with flowers in it. So I am a happy camper starting this. And if you'd like to see how I did it and the tricks that I did to keep this painting hopefully on the loose side, I hope you'll come join me. I'm going to use this size 8 flat brush, which is wider than the handle of the bucket, so I'm going to have to turn it, but I want to try to do this with the widest, biggest brush that I feel like I can use. And I have found if I will pick the brush I would normally go to and go up 2 sizes, that seems to be about right. So I'm looking at my reference photo, and there are a number of places where I'm seeing other colors dropped in. So I want to be mindful of the colors and not just do this in the grays. But I'm going to start off first with the grays and let you see how I lay that in. To make my favorite gray, I use Ultramarine Blue, Burnt Umber, and a lot of white. And I made several different piles of values, a dark, medium, and light. So I'm going into my lightest gray mixture, and I'm just going to get that handle in one stroke. I don't mind turning it. One stroke didn't get enough coverage. I'm not necessarily trying to leave that orange. I think some orange is going to show through regardless. And then on the back side, that's much darker. I mixed some liquid in with my gray because there was so much white in there, but I'm still having to use a little liquid. It just seems to be dragging. And now I'm going to go ahead while I've got the dark and just put in the dark places where I see them. So the best advice I can give you about reflections is start out painting exactly what you see, putting in the color and the shape where you see it in the photograph or with your live still life. Don't worry about if it makes sense or not. Start out doing that and then go back and tweak where you need to. So it's time to assess a little bit. I think this rust color is bothering me just because I don't like that particular color, just my personal taste. So I might lighten that and make it a little more vibrant. I'm going to go back through, some of these edges just seem a little too hard even though they're in oil. So I'm just going to go back through and soften these. And even though in the photograph this line ends pretty even, it bothers me, some of these lines. So I'm just going to take artistic liberty. I think the top of it looks pretty good. Pretty happy with that. I don't like that being such a solid block. I'm going to drop a little light in there just to have some reflections going down through the middle of that. I think that might just soften it up. I'm still using my big brush, and it has been difficult to get these thin lines that are going across, but in order to keep this loose, I'm not going to give in to the temptation to drop down to a smaller brush. So that's what I'm going to do next. I wanted you to see the difference where I just took my brush over this other one and just blurred it. It's gotten longer, but I can always, you know, shorten it. But I think that looks so much more reflective than this looking so solid. So I'm just going to do the same thing here and let you see it. So I'm just lightly, I'm going to wipe some of that paint off my brush. Sorry, I'm holding the camera with one hand and painting with another. But I'm just kind of putting a little more pressure. I might combine those a little bit. Can even do that to soften that up. Might even combine those. I think that's a little prettier. I think that was one thing that bothered me. I didn't like these two streaks and that separate yellow dot. So when someone's looking at this painting, they're not going to be looking at the reference photo, only I'm going to see that. So I think that's a lot softer and nicer. I'm going to go back in and add some lighter gray there, but you can see how much of a difference that's making already. I think when you have reflections, they need to look streaky. They need to look very vertical. So, you know, if you can just use your brush to pull down through. I'm doing this very softly. I'm putting very little pressure on the brush, but it's getting it blurrier. I do like crisp, whiter places. That's just canvas, but I'm going to put some whiter there. But I do think it's good to have some real darks, real lights, and then some blurry places. So let me continue to soften that up, and I'll let you see it again. And here you can see it more completed. Of course, I continue to tweak on it a little bit over the next couple of days, but this was pretty much finished. I love using orange, burnt sienna, and burnt umber when I do clay pots. So that's what I did with this, just dropping in the burnt umber where it's darker. I think the next thing I'm going to do, since I still have my paints out for this clay pot, I really like how that ended up. And this little line right there is actually the original outline of the acrylic. So I'm going to go ahead and put these two other pots in, and then we'll move on to our flowers. Here you can see where I blocked in the orange and burnt sienna and burnt umber, and then I just went with my brush and smoothed those transition lines. Since the flowers are really very creamy, I decided to try yellow ochre and white as the base. Okay, I'm going to put these flowers in. We're actually having a tropical storm here in North Carolina today, and my easel is real close to a window, so I hope that noise doesn't bother you. So I'm using the same rough brush. It's the same one I used on the pots. I'm just trying to, in an effort to keep this loose, that's a little stained, but I think it's pretty clean. So I'm going to my little mixtures. This is actually, I put too much yellow ochre in there. This is actually deeper than the photograph. But in the photograph, the colors are so similar. I'm going to intentionally get a little more distinction in the values, and that's going to be my center. So my plan here is I'm just going to, starting with that back petal, I'm going to take a fair amount of paint, and I'm going to go in and I'm just going to put some loose brush marks. You notice I wasn't trying to follow that curve, and there's a little pile of paint there. So I'm just going to try to be mindful where those petals are, but I'm not going to try to scrub in and keep things inside the line. I'm just doing single strokes. I'm turning my brush to pull off that extra paint. I'm actually going to make a little bit darker value just to put down in the center and on the side. Until I didn't have quite as much paint there. And that doesn't look particularly smooth, but I'm okay with that. I want this to look loose. That's the whole point of this exercise, is to keep these loose. They're looking a little beige to me, so I may, instead of cream, but let's try this one in front that's a little lighter. So I'm using the one with more white, and so I don't want to mix it into what's behind. So I'm going to decide where I'm going to put that stroke. I'm going to put my brush down with lots of paint, and I'm just going to pull it down. May not want to leave that much paint on there. I can just pull a bit off. Isn't that lovely? I mean, it's just fresh, it's clean, it's got great movement to it, it's expressive. So let's do this other one. So we're going to come up. This whole petal is pretty light. I'm going to have to mix up some more of my paint, but you see where I'm going with this. I'm not concerned with these lines, the drawing. It's just designed to give me an outline, but I'm going to try to do all these flowers the same way. Big strokes, lots of paint. Let's go ahead and in the center of this one, there's a lot of this orange. So I took Cad orange medium and the yellow ochre and some white. I think that's a beautiful kind of sherbet, dark sherbet color. Comes down a little bit into that petal. We see a little bit over here. Really lovely. I might go ahead and put some in where I'm seeing it on the other flowers while I've got my brush in that. I'm not seeing any in this top one, but I think it might be pretty to drop some in, so I'm going to do that anyway. Okay, I'm going to have to mix up a little more paint, and I will go ahead and get the rest of these flowers in and let you see the effect. I thought I'd go ahead and film a little bit more of this since I've mixed up the paint. And I will say this takes a fair amount of paint to do this, so if you're someone who struggles with getting enough paint on your brush, this may be a challenge for you. I'm just looking at my values, trying to see where are things light, where are they getting darker. I made an extra pile where there's a very subtle change. See how dark those two are, but this is very subtle. I just I took this pile and my lighter pile and made something right in the middle. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that outside line. Again, trying to Get some big expressive strokes. I'm turning that brush a little bit. Going back to the lighter. I want to see a nice distinction there. Going back in with my lightest value, hitting some of those outside edges. Now I'm going to show where some of those petals actually come up into that flower. I'm going to have to get back from this and see if this is working like I think it's working. We're going to put a little more detail in the center of this so it doesn't just look like a blob, but I think that needs to be just filled in there. Let me get back, take a look. It's real important to do that. If you're like me, I tend to really get up on a painting, and I think it's important to get back, because the people who are looking at your artwork when it's hanging up on a wall, they're not going to be up on it. They're going to be back. So you want it to look great from behind or from a distance. Okay, having gotten back from it, I like the feel of this. It does look a little beige for me. The flowers in the original photograph are very creamy. They're not yellow. We're going to have a lot of yellow flowers, a lot of this ultramarine blue. So rather than making this more yellow, which is kind of a color palette that I like, I'm going to go ahead and put these brighter colors in around it. And it might be nice to have kind of a resting place right here. If we keep this, I'm going to go ahead and do that now while I'm thinking about it. I'm going to, well, that's actually a daffodil, I think. But down here, I'm going to get some of that cream color reflecting so that comes across. Okay, so let me go ahead and I'm going to do the same thing with ultramarine. I'm going to mix some light to dark ultramarine values, and I'm going to put those in. Might start putting some greenery in. You know, it really helps to get a framework. I think it's good to move around the painting. I know I kind of stayed in one place with that watering can, but I'm going to try at this point to start moving around the painting, adding in these greens, different values to see how this is working before I make any changes there. We may end up leaving that, and I also need to get a little more detail in the center of these. So let me work on this ultramarine part, and I'll let you take a look. So I have that ultramarine flower in, and notice how dark I'm putting the foliage underneath it. I was using ultramarine and sap green to get it super dark underneath there, and then I'm using lighter greens. I'm continuing to use a big flat brush for this. I did not go down to a small brush. Even where I'm putting in those lines and small dots, I continued using a big brush, and wow, it really did help keep it loose. So I'm doing the exact same thing with the orange Prim Rose. I'm using another Rosemary Company super rough brush. I've mixed several values. I'm going back in and getting those lightest values in. You see I'm holding the brush. I have almost no control, very little control here. Just getting those lighter petals in. Again, gosh, just super loose. So now I'm going to go back into my darker value, and I'm just going to fill that in. I'm not too worried about it. I am being mindful of the watering can because I don't want to go across that, but other than that, this is just super loose. I'm really seeing the pencil line, so I'm probably going to go over this again, but I just want you to see how quick, how loose I'm doing that. I'm going to go back, do the greenery the same way using a big brush, and just keep on keeping it super loose. Here I've started putting in the greenery around that orange flower. Again, I'm still using my big brush. Get back from it and let you see it. Looks nice, doesn't it? And using that big brush, it's forcing me to use big strokes. You can see it now, how this is starting to shape together. But the big brush, the big strokes is just keeping a loose look throughout this painting. I've started putting the daffodils in, still using the big brush. I didn't drop down for that, just kind of one stroke, putting that orange trumpet in. Putting in some greenery, using a big flat brush to put the yellow petals in. Again, trying to do just one stroke when I can. Another way to achieve a really loose look is to have minimal detail. And if you'll notice with these daffodils, that is just the most minimal I can do. Very little detail there. So now it's time for me to put in these little grape hyacinths. And I think it would be very difficult for me to put those in and then try to paint in the background around them. So for that reason, I've decided I'm going to stop and put in my background and then put the hyacinths in last. I've got a short little video part coming up in a few minutes that's going to explain a little more about the background, but I'm using a combination of the Ultramarine Blue and the Cad Orange with white. And I tested it out on the canvas to see if I liked it first. I'm continuing to use, actually I went up to a huge brush, but then I also used the little angle brush where it got super close to the watering can and I didn't want to, get my oil paints mixed. So here we have the background getting lighter as it goes across, and you see the beginning of me putting in the foreground. So I'm getting ready to do the last piece of this painting, which is going to be putting in the little grape hyacinths. And because they're so tiny, I felt like it would be difficult to put the background in around them. So I decided to go ahead and put the background in. And the foreground, I want to talk with you just for a couple of minutes about why I made some of these decisions. If you've watched many of my videos, you know sometimes the background and foreground for me are the most difficult parts of the painting. I really struggle with that. I wanted everything to keep good color harmony with this painting. So I took blue and orange, which are the two main colors in this painting, and they are opposite on the color wheel. So they gray each other out. So I took blue and orange and white and did this gradation for the background. I love the color harmony. I was careful to get it blue enough and dark enough so that it was much deeper in value than our watering can. And I love how it gets lighter. I did this in oil, but if you're using acrylics, I really would suggest you put a slow dry medium in there so that you can get a really smooth gradation. And this idea, I saw someone on Pinterest where they did a foreground and she did it much more abstract and added a lot more colors, but everything was kind of wavy, like it was glass, and it was almost like it was water, like it was a reflection on water. So I used this same let me see what that color was. Well, this yellow ochre that I had used in the flowers, I used that in a more concentrated form for the bottom. Again, great color harmony in this painting. I was tempted to add a little bit of pink or something else, but I'm so glad I kept my palette really simple, and I think the color harmony in this is one of the best paintings I've done as far as that goes. So I used this color again in the foreground, and I just took my brush and I put some of the ultramarine blue in here, and then I just, because this was in oil, I just very lightly went back and forth with a soft brush until that blended. And again, if you put slow dry medium in your colors, you can get the same effect, but I just love how that looks. So with the grape hyacinth, I'm trying to keep this painting loose. I'm not sure if I can get those small little beads using a flat brush. So I'm going to take my sketch pad and I'm going to try using a little round brush and a little flat brush. I'd like to do it with a flat if I can, just to try to keep this loose look. And I'll let you see how that turns out, and then I'll let you see me put those grape hyacinths in. But I just wanted to stop and explain why I chose what I did, and I'm just really thrilled with the results. I think it's really effective. It still lets the painting pop, but it puts some interest and drama in the background and in the foreground. So maybe you can incorporate that into your next painting. So I tried several different brushes. Here's the flat brush, and that left a very funny kind of pointed. I didn't like that at all. This was an old round brush that was a little splayed, and I thought that was just kind of a mess. Here I used the tip of an angular brush. Did not like that at all, but finally, eureka. This is, I don't know what this brush is. It is so well loved. All the paint's worn off, but I've had it for years, and this is the brush. It's a small liner. It's actually the brush I signed my paintings with, so I was hesitant to even use it because I always feel so protective of it. But here you can see, you can get a nice little loose dot. It's not too precise, but you have a little control over it. So that's what I'm going to use to put in these grape hyacinths. I have even considered, because that background is still pretty tacky, to the touch, I've considered just not putting in the background or putting in the hyacinths or waiting until it dries, but I think I'm going to chance it. I'm kind of ready to wrap up this painting. So I'm going to put in some thin stems to give me a roadmap of where these hyacinths are going to go, and then I'll put those in on top of it. We'll see how it looks. So here I've taken a little flat brush and I've put the stems in, and you'll notice I put some at angles, some overlapping a little bit. So I have 7 of them now, and I feel good about that composition. So now I'm going to go in, and using those as my guide, I'm going to start adding in the little grape hyacinths. It's amazing how just taking 2 values of ultramarine and white and putting in some little dots, and it looks like real flowers. It looks like little grape hyacinths. So that was super simple. So to recap ways to keep your painting loose, put in the drawing yourself if possible, but if you do use a projector, use the lines as guides only, not a hard and fast outline. Use the biggest brushes you can, and try to find brushes that are slightly worn rather than chiseled. Try to put in single big strokes using lots of paint. And if you'll limit the detail as much as possible, that will add to that sense of a loose, impressionistic painting. And of course, when considering the background and foreground, try to reuse the same colors you've already used in the painting to ensure great color harmony. Hey, if this video was helpful, I would appreciate a thumbs up, and if you'll hit subscribe, you'll be sure not to miss the next free video that's coming out soon. And speaking of free, if you'd like a free video of my favorite colors and how I use them, you can get that download at my website. There's a link in the description box below. Thanks for watching, and God bless.